Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves not nestled in our cozy beds, but instead, we're stepping directly into the hustle and stench of ancient Rome. Imagine the sun beating down on your neck, the press of bodies thick around you, the air a heady mix of spices, sweat, and well, let's just say sanitation wasn't exactly their strong suit. You're surrounded by legions marching, merchants hawking, and the constant, low rumble of a city teeming with 1,000,000 souls, all vying for survival. In fact, the chances of you, a modern human, making it through a single Roman day unscathed? Slim to none. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And because I'm curious, let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. Maybe we can all connect across time and space. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun has barely peeked over the Palatine Hill, but your day has already begun, and not by choice. A rooster's shrill cry, amplified by the city's acoustics, rips you from a fitful sleep on your straw-stuffed mattress. If you're lucky, you have a small room in an insula, a multi-story apartment building. If you're really lucky, it's not about to collapse. These things weren't exactly built to modern safety standards. Historians still argue whether the infamous fire of Rome started accidentally or was an act of arson by Nero. But regardless, fire was a constant threat in these crowded, wooden structures. Regardless, there's no lingering in bed. Your stomach is already rumbling, but forget a leisurely breakfast. You're starting the day on an empty stomach, unless you're part of the elite, of course. But let's be honest, if you were, you wouldn't be listening to this. You'd be feasting on dormice stuffed with nuts, attended by a small army of slaves. Speaking of which, slavery was absolutely integral to Roman society, underpinning its entire economy. Your day will likely involve encountering dozens, perhaps hundreds, of enslaved people going about their grueling daily tasks. Before you even think about food, there's the small matter of personal hygiene. Let's just say Roman plumbing wasn't exactly up to par. Your options are a public latrine, a communal experience involving a sponge on a stick and, well, let's just move on, or a chamber pot you empty later. Either way, the smell is unforgettable. Some Romans actually believed that bathing in the urine of infants was a teeth-whitening technique, so you can imagine the variety of interesting scents assaulting your nostrils as you try to brush your teeth with a twig and some chalk. Next, you head out into the street, and the chaos immediately hits you like a wall. Carts rumble over cobblestones, their iron wheels a deafening screech. The cries of vendors fill the air. Olives, fresh fish, garum, the finest fish sauce in the empire. Garum, by the way, was everywhere. Romans loved the stuff, and its pungent aroma clung to everything like a particularly persistent X. Speaking of smells, you also have to navigate the frequent presence left by animals and people, given the lack of proper waste disposal. If you're a plebeian, a commoner, your day is likely filled with labor. You might be a builder, hauling heavy stones for some brand new monument. You might be a baker, sweating over a hot oven all day. Or perhaps you're a dockworker, unloading ships laden with goods from across the empire. Regardless, the work is hard, the hours are long, and the pay is, well, let's just say, enough to survive, is a generous assessment. But even if you're wealthy, your day isn't exactly a picnic. You might spend your morning at the Forum, the heart of Roman political and social life. Here, you conduct business, engage in legal disputes, and listen to speeches. Political discourse was a major part of Roman life, even if it was often dramatic. You'd also have to navigate the complex web of Roman social hierarchy, constantly aware of your status and your obligations to your patrons, if you had them, and your clients, if you were one. Regardless of your social standing, entertainment was a vital part of Roman life. In the afternoon, you might head to the Colosseum, the massive amphitheater that hosted gladiatorial contests and wild animal hunts. Imagine the roar of the crowd, the clash of steel, the blood-curdling screams, not exactly relaxing, but undeniably captivating. Historians still debate the true purpose of these games. Were they simply blood sport, or did they serve a deeper social and political function? But regardless, the Colosseum was a testament to Roman engineering and a symbol of Roman power. One quirk of Roman entertainment was the Naumachia, essentially a mock naval battle staged in a flooded arena. Talk about spectacle! Alternatively, you could visit the public baths, the thermae. These weren't just places to get clean. They were social hubs where Romans of all classes, though often segregated by time, could relax, exercise, and gossip. You'd move through a series of rooms, from the caldarium, hot bath, to the frigidarium, cold bath, enjoying massages, games, and perhaps even a light meal. Just try not to think too hard about how many people have been in that water before you. By evening, you're exhausted, covered in grime, and probably nursing a headache from the noise and the crowds. Dinner is a simple affair, perhaps some bread, cheese, and olives if you're lucky. If you're wealthy, you'll enjoy a lavish multi-course meal, complete with wine and entertainment. But either way, you're likely eating in cramped, dimly lit conditions. And speaking of wine, be careful what you drink. The Romans didn't have our modern understanding of sanitation, and their wine was often heavily adulterated with spices, honey, and even lead to improve the flavor and preservation. In fact, some historians have suggested that lead poisoning contributed to the decline of the Roman Empire. Just a fun fact to mull over. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across the city, you might find some entertainment in the form of street performers, musicians, or storytellers. Or if you're feeling lucky and brave, you might venture into one of Rome's many taverns or gambling dens. But be warned, these places were often dens of vice, frequented by thieves, prostitutes, and other unsavory characters. One slightly more respectable form of evening entertainment was attending a poetry reading, although given the length and density of some Roman poetry, that might be more of a test of endurance than a pleasure. Before you collapse back into your straw bed, you need to be aware that nocturnal Rome wasn't exactly safe. The streets were poorly lit, patrolled by a small and often corrupt city watch. Crime was rampant, and if you weren't careful, you could easily become a victim of theft, assault, or even murder. Some Romans even hired bodyguards to escort them through the streets at night. Finally, you return to your insula, climb the rickety stairs, and collapse onto your bed. The city's noise slowly fades into a dull roar, and you drift off to sleep, dreaming of, well, probably trying to figure out how to survive another day in this chaotic, vibrant, and utterly unforgiving city. But remember, for all its hardships, ancient Rome was also a place of incredible innovation, art, and culture. They built roads, aqueducts, and monuments that still stand today. They developed sophisticated legal and political systems. They produced some of the greatest writers, artists, and philosophers in history. They gave us, among other things, concrete. So, while a single day in ancient Rome might break you, it was also a day that shaped the course of Western civilization. Alright, settle in, settle in. That's it. Just ease your way into this. You blink. Once. Twice. The light assaults your eyes, doesn't it? Not the soft, filtered glow of a modern sunrise simulation. Nope. This is the real deal. Harsh, unfiltered Roman sunlight, streaming through a grimy windowpane, or, more accurately, a sheet of semi-transparent glass made from blown sand. Fancy, right? You groan, a sound that's immediately swallowed by the cacophony erupting around you. It's like waking up in the middle of a gladiatorial combat, except instead of lions and screaming spectators, it's just life. Raw, unfiltered Roman life. You're lying on a thin straw mattress, scratchy and uneven, in what can generously be described as a room. More like a cramped cell, really. Think college dorm, but pre-air conditioning and with significantly less personal space. Welcome to your insula. The smell hits you next. Oh, the smell. It's a potent blend. Stale urine, probably not yours. Hopefully, roasting chestnuts, that's actually kind of nice. Unwashed bodies, less nice. And something vaguely floral trying desperately to mask everything else, failing miserably. You can almost taste it, can't you? The Roman obsession with perfumes, by the way, wasn't just for show. It was a practical necessity. Hygiene, as you might have guessed, wasn't exactly a top priority. Historians still argue whether public baths were really as ubiquitous as the surviving architecture suggests, or if it was more of a class thing. Let's be honest, if you lived here, you probably weren't a regular at the fancy thermi. You slowly sit up, wincing as your muscles protest. This mattress has clearly seen better days, and possibly more emperors than you've seen birthday parties. The insula you're currently inhabiting is a multi-story apartment building, common in ancient Rome, especially in bustling urban centers like, well, Rome. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a high-rise, except made of brick and concrete, and with a distinct lack of elevators. Prepare for some serious stair climbing. And speaking of stairs, the noise levels are intensifying. You can hear the rhythmic pounding of footsteps above you, the shrill cries of children playing, or possibly fighting, and the bartering calls of vendors hawking their wares in the street below. It's a symphony of urban chaos. You can hear someone yelling, probably about the price of fish. Or maybe the price of garum, that fermented fish sauce that Romans loved, and which you might find surprisingly familiar if you're a fan of Southeast Asian cuisine. Weird, right? It was practically the ketchup of the ancient world. You find a tiny scrap of cloth in the corner of your cell and wipe your face. It's a pointless gesture, but it makes you feel marginally better. You glance around the room, taking stock. It's sparsely furnished, to say the least. Besides the mattress, there's a rickety wooden stool, a small table littered with crumbs, and what looks suspiciously like rodent droppings. Try not to think about it. And a clay lamp hanging precariously from the ceiling. No IKEA here, friend. Everything is functional, rudimentary. Luxury was not a common theme in the insula. You shuffle over to the window, careful not to step on anything questionable. Peeking out, you get a full view of the street scene below. It's a vibrant, teeming mass of humanity. People of all shapes, sizes, and ethnicities jostle for space on the narrow, uneven pavement. Senators in their togas stride past slaves carrying baskets overflowing with produce. Street performers entertain the crowds with music and acrobatics. Beggars plead for alms. It's a snapshot of Roman society in all its chaotic glory. You spot a dog attempting to scavenge a discarded piece of bread, only to be chased away by a disgruntled merchant. Classic. Now, here's something you might not know. Despite the grandeur often associated with Rome, most Romans didn't live in opulent villas. They lived in these insulae. Imagine the population density. It's estimated that at its peak, Rome housed over 1 million people. Talk about rush hour. Some of these buildings were notoriously shoddily constructed, prone to collapse and fire. Living here was a gamble, a daily roll of the dice. You spot a man relieving himself against a nearby building. You quickly pull your head back inside. Yeah, about that gamble. You're going to need to find some shoes. You remember something vaguely disturbing from a documentary you watched late one night on YouTube. Something about Romans and public sanitation. Let's just say, avoid puddles. You try to recall how you even ended up here. It's all a bit hazy. 1 minute, you were binge-watching documentaries on ancient Rome. The next you were waking up in this squalid apartment building. Did you fall asleep? Did you have too much pizza? Did you accidentally stumble through some kind of temporal rift created by a particularly strong electromagnetic field generated by your router? Don't laugh. Weirder things have happened. You notice a small clay bowl on the table. Inside, there's a handful of olives and a chunk of stale bread. Breakfast of champions. You reluctantly pick up a piece of bread and take a tentative bite. It's surprisingly hard, almost like a Roman biscotti. You chew slowly, savoring the lack of obvious mold. You hear a rhythmic tapping on your door. It's not a polite knock. It's more like a percussive assault. Hey! You in there? Get up. You're late, a gruff voice shouts. Late? Late for what? You're not sure. It dawns on you that you're probably expected somewhere. Romans were generally early risers, starting their day before dawn. It had to do with getting everything done before the heat of the midday sun made it unbearable to move. You rummage through the few items scattered around the room, desperately searching for something, anything, that might give you a clue as to your identity or your purpose here. You find a worn leather pouch containing a few bronze coins. Not exactly a fortune, but hey, it's something. A small wooden stylus and a wax tablet. You squint at the tablet, trying to decipher the barely legible scrawls. It appears to be a list of errands. Buy bread, you read. Check. You already accomplished that one. Deliver scrolls to Marcus. That sounds vaguely official. Avoid Clodia. Ominous. Who's Clodia? You have a feeling you don't want to find out. One of those things, perhaps, better left avoided. Historians still argue whether Clodia Metelli, a famous Roman woman, was a scandalous beauty or a wrongly maligned victim of political slander. Given the company you now keep, perhaps either is a likely case. You open the door a crack, peering out cautiously. Standing in the hallway is a burly man with a stern expression and a tunic that's seen better days. He looks like he's carved from granite, and he's clearly not in the mood for pleasantries. He glares at you. Well, what are you waiting for? Marcus is expecting those scrolls. Okay, time to improvise. You plaster on a sheepish grin. Ah, yes. The scrolls. Of course. Just, getting ready. You grab the wax tablet and the stylus, pretending to study the list intently. Almost forgot about that important thing. The man raises an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Just get a move on, all right. And try not to lose them this time. He turns and strides down the hallway, his sandals slapping against the stone floor. You exhale slowly, feeling a bead of sweat trickle down your forehead. You're not entirely sure what's going on, but you have a feeling this is going to be an interesting day. Right now, however, you might even prefer waking up to the sound of your roommate's alarm at 6 a.m. Maybe. Okay, probably not. But close. But you take another long, hard look at your cell, at the stale bread and likely rodent droppings. And then you glance again at the clay tablet. You are in Rome, after all. And so you take a deep breath. You step out into the hallway. After all, you have some scrolls to deliver to this Marcus and someone named Clodia to avoid. All in a day's work, right? Maybe you'll get to see a chariot race. Or not. But for now, you have an urgent, unavoidable date with Roman reality. All right, get some coffee. It might be a long day. All right, settle down. Close your eyes. Just kidding. Unless... No, you need to see this. Take a deep breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Feel that? That's the crisp clean. Just kidding again. That's the surprisingly potent aroma of 18th century London about to slap you in the face. Hope you wore your nose plugs. Because today, my friend, you are stepping back in time. You are a time traveler. Cue dramatic echo. Well, not really. More like you're imagining you're a time traveler. Semantics. But the point is, you're here, smack dab in the heart of London, sometime around, let's say, 1750. You blink, trying to adjust to the perpetual twilight of the city. It's early morning, or at least as early as it gets in this smog-choked metropolis. You pull your threadbare blanket tighter around you. Aw, your blanket. Your only friend in this strange, smelly land. You're not exactly sure how you got here, or who you were before you got here. Amnesia is a convenient plot device, isn't it? Just go with it. It's much easier than explaining quantum physics. You roll over on your bed is generous. It's more like a pile of straw and rags shoved into a dark corner of a shared garret. You share it with. Let's just say you don't want to know what you share it with. You try to ignore the rhythmic snoring of your neighbor, a burly butcher who smells perpetually of stale meat and something vaguely metallic. It's not the most pleasant alarm clock. You sit up slowly, your muscles protesting with a chorus of pops and cracks. You're stiff and cold, and the dampness seems to have seeped into your very bones. You glance around the room. It's small, cramped, and utterly devoid of any charm. A single, grime-covered window offers a hazy view of the street below. You pull on your clothes, which consist of a patched-up shirt, a pair of equally patched-up breeches, and a worn-out coat. They're not exactly haute couture, but they'll do. You lace up your boots, which are also in a sorry state of disrepair. You suspect they've seen better centuries. You haven't had a bath in, well, you've lost count. Let's just say you're not winning any hygiene awards today. You're hungry. Ravenously hungry. Your stomach is rumbling like a disgruntled bear. You haven't eaten since yesterday morning, and even then it was just a crust of stale bread you managed to scavenge. Today's breakfast prospects aren't looking good. You sigh, resigned to the gnawing emptiness in your belly. You head for the door, carefully stepping over the sleeping forms of your fellow garret dwellers. They're a motley crew, a mix of beggars, thieves, and down-on-their-luck laborers. You're not entirely sure which category you fall into. You slip out into the narrow hallway, which is even darker and dirtier than your room. You descend the rickety staircase, trying to avoid the loose boards that creak ominously with each step. One wrong move, and you'll end up tumbling headfirst into the squalor below. You emerge onto the street, and bam, you're hit by a wall of smells. It's a cacophony of odors, a symphony of stink. There's the acrid smell of coal smoke, the pungent aroma of rotting garbage, the sickly sweet stench of human waste, and the pervasive odor of unwashed bodies. It's enough to make your eyes water and your stomach churn. You gag slightly, trying to adjust to the assault on your senses. Welcome to 18th century London. The street is already bustling with activity. Carts rumble past, their wheels splashing through puddles of mud and filth. Pedestrians jostle and shove, hurrying to and fro. Street vendors hawk their wares, their voices blending into a raucous chorus. Children dart through the crowds, their faces smeared with grime. You have to be careful here. Pickpockets are everywhere, their nimble fingers itching to relieve you of whatever meager possessions you have. You clutch your coin purse tightly, praying that it's enough to buy you a loaf of bread. You also want to buy soap, but bread seems more important. Historians still argue whether personal hygiene was a higher priority than a full stomach for the average Londoner, but honestly, you're leaning towards food. You join the throng, navigating the crowded streets with a mixture of apprehension and determination. You dodge a stray dog scavenging for scraps, narrowly avoid being run over by a horse-drawn carriage, and sidestep a pile of, well, you don't want to think about what it is. The dangers are everywhere. You remember reading about the Great Fire of London in 1666. It seems so distant now, almost like a myth. But the scars of that disaster are still visible in the city's architecture. The mishmash of old and new buildings a testament to the resilience of the Londoners. Ironically, the fire actually helped improve sanitation in some areas, as it burned away much of the accumulated filth. A bit like using a flamethrower to clean your kitchen. A bit extreme, perhaps. You weave through the crowd, making your way towards the market. You've heard that you can sometimes find work there, unloading carts or carrying goods. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. And more importantly, it pays. Or at least, it might pay. As you walk, you notice the stark contrast between the wealthy and the poor. The wealthy are carried in ornate sedan chairs, their faces powdered and their clothes adorned with lace and jewels. They look down on the commoners with disdain, as if they're a different species. They definitely smell better. You pass a group of men gathered outside a coffee house. They're discussing politics, business, and the latest gossip. Coffee houses were the social hubs of the 18th century, places where people could gather to exchange ideas and information. They were also breeding grounds for rumors and conspiracies, of course. You try to catch snippets of their conversation, but they're speaking too quickly and their accents are too thick. You remember reading that some historians believe that coffee houses played a significant role in the development of the British economy. The free exchange of information and ideas fostered innovation and entrepreneurship. Others, however, argue that they were simply places for wealthy men to waste time and drink expensive beverages. This is a scholarly debate you can't weigh in on. You're too hungry. You continue on your way, your stomach growling even louder. You spot a bakery in the distance, the aroma of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. Your mouth waters. You quicken your pace, hoping to reach it before your resolve crumbles completely. Suddenly, you stumble over something in the street. You fall to the ground, landing hard on your hands and knees. You look up to see what tripped you. It's a dead rat. A big, fat, juicy, no. Bad thoughts. You scramble to your feet, brushing off your clothes and trying to suppress the urge to vomit. You glare at the dead rat, then look around to see if anyone saw you fall. Luckily, no one seems to have noticed. Everyone is too busy with their own lives. You sigh relieved. You decide to take a slightly different route, avoiding the area where the rat met its untimely end. As you walk, you notice a group of children playing a game in the street. They're chasing each other and laughing, their faces lit up with joy. It's a brief moment of happiness in the midst of the squalor and despair. You smile, touched by their innocence. You almost feel happy. Almost. You see a sign for a penny dreadful shop. Penny dreadfuls were cheap, sensational novels that were popular among the working class. They were filled with tales of murder, mystery, and adventure. A bit like modern-day tabloids, only longer and less accurate. You resist the urge to go inside. You can't afford to waste your money on frivolous entertainment. You need to eat. You are almost at the market now. The crowds are getting thicker. The noise is getting louder. You can smell the fresh produce, the fish, the meat. Your stomach is screaming in protest. You push your way through the throng, determined to find a way to earn some money. Then you see it. An old woman sitting on the street corner, selling apples. Her face is wrinkled and weathered. Her eyes are kind. She holds out an apple to you. It's small and bruised, but it looks delicious. "Here, child," she says, her voice raspy. "Take it." You look like you need it. You hesitate. You don't want to take her charity. But your stomach wins out. You take the apple and thank her profusely. You take a bite. It's sweet and tart, and the juice runs down your chin. It's the best thing you've ever tasted. A small joke, It's probably the first real fruit you've seen since you arrived in this century. You savor every bite, closing your eyes and letting the flavor transport you to another place. When you finish the apple, you feel a little bit better. All right, settle in, settle in. Let's talk breakfast Roman style. But first, adjust your toga. It's probably riding up. You wouldn't want to be caught flashing any plebeians, would you? So imagine it's dawn, or what passes for dawn in a bustling Roman city. The air is thick with the smell of, well, everything. Let's just say sanitation wasn't exactly Rome's strong suit. But hey, at least the sun is probably shining. You're awake. You're Roman. And you're hungry. If you're part of the vast majority, the plebs, the common folk, your breakfast is going to be simple. Painfully simple. You're looking at a pulse. Basically, think of a thick, bland porridge made from emmer wheat, barley, or even cheaper grains if you're really down on your luck. Maybe, if you're feeling particularly decadent, you'll splash it with a little olive oil. Or, if the gods are smiling on you, you might have a stray olive or two to toss in. Luxurious, I know. Now, this pulse wasn't exactly winning any culinary awards. It was filling, sure. Sustaining. But exciting? Not so much. Historians still argue whether the blandness of the staple diet was a deliberate choice to suppress any hint of rebellion among the working classes, or simply a reflection of available and affordable resources. I'm going with the latter. It seems the Romans, just like us, were always trying to make a buck, even if that buck came at the expense of their taste buds. You might be thinking, okay, porridge, not great, but not terrible. At least it's warm. Well, hold your horses, my friend. Sometimes, even that was a luxury. If you were a slave or a truly impoverished citizen, you might be eating cold leftovers from the previous day. Talk about a mood killer. Imagine waking up, ready to conquer the world, or at least finish that day's quota of bricklaying, and being greeted with a bowl of congealed grain mush. It's enough to make anyone want to overthrow an emperor. And the interesting thing is, even though pulse was the backbone of the plebeian diet, they knew it wasn't exactly haute cuisine. There are accounts of Roman soldiers complaining about being fed pulse too often. Give us meat, they'd bellow. Give us wine. Ah, the eternal cry of the disgruntled infantryman. A fringe tidbit for you. Some scholars believe that variations in pulse preparation played a significant role in local customs. Each region probably had its own slightly different recipe, adding herbs, spices, or whatever else they could scavenge to make it a bit more palatable. Imagine Pulse Wars, the Emmer Strikes Back. I'd watch that. Now, let's hop over to the other side of the tracks, shall we? Let's see what our patrician pals are having for breakfast. Ah, much better. Forget your porridge, my friend. If you're a wealthy Roman, your breakfast is a far more lavish affair. You might start with some panis siligineus, a type of fine white bread. Think of it as the Roman equivalent of a croissant, only slightly less buttery and infinitely more likely to have been touched by dozens of slaves before it reaches your plate. But hey, who's counting? And what do you put on this fancy bread? Well, honey is a popular choice. Maybe some fresh cheese, or even a few slices of ham. If you're feeling really fancy, you might even have some imported fruit. Figs, dates, pomegranates, the kind of stuff that would make a plebeian faint with envy. And you're washing this down with a cup of mulsum, wine sweetened with honey. Basically, a mimosa, but Roman. Classy. The wealthy Romans took their food seriously. They had entire kitchens dedicated to preparing their meals, staffed by legions of slaves who were experts in all sorts of culinary arts. We're talking about complex sauces, exotic spices, and presentation that would make a Michelin-starred chef weep with joy. And that was just breakfast. Can you imagine what dinner was like? probably involving roast peacock, dormice stuffed with nuts, and enough wine to float a small fleet of galleys. Mainstream historical fact for you. While wealth disparity was incredibly vast, the wealthy often felt obligated to offer food and entertainment to the lower classes to maintain social order. Think of it as ancient Roman trickle-down economics, but with more crumbs and fewer actual benefits for the poor. This patronage system was deeply ingrained in Roman society. The elite had to keep the masses happy or risk a revolt. It's like when your parents buy you something to shut you up. But it wasn't all about pure indulgence. Even the wealthy Romans valued moderation sometimes. Seneca, the famous Stoic philosopher, often wrote about the importance of simple living and avoiding excess. He'd probably be rolling in his grave if he saw some of the feasts that were being thrown. Enough with the roast flamingo, he'd probably yell, "Eat some lentils and contemplate your mortality." Now, a quirky tidbit. Some Roman elites apparently believed that certain foods had medicinal properties. Pliny the Elder, a famous Roman naturalist, wrote extensively about the health benefits of everything from cabbage to garlic. Apparently, if you ate enough garlic, you could ward off not only vampires, probably not a huge concern in ancient Rome, but also pretty much every other ailment known to man. Move over, modern medicine. Of course, this dietary disparity had a huge impact on the health and well-being of the Roman population. The wealthy, with their access to a varied and nutritious diet, were generally healthier and lived longer than the poor. The poor, on the other hand, were often malnourished and susceptible to disease. Historians still argue whether this difference in lifespan and health was more due to access to nutrition or better sanitation and healthcare. It was probably a combination of all three. Kind of like when your mom says, "Eat your vegetables and wash your hands." So there you have it. A glimpse into the Roman breakfast, a tale of two meals. One, a simple, sustaining porridge. The other, a decadent feast fit for an emperor. It's a reminder that even in ancient Rome, what you ate depended largely on who you were. And while the meals may have been different, the purpose was the same, to fuel the body and prepare for the day ahead. Whether that day involved laying bricks or ruling an empire. And one last little joke before we go. What's a Roman's favorite type of tree? A family tree. Okay, I'll see myself out. Alright, settle in, because today, we're ditching the emperors and senators and diving headfirst into the everyday lives of the average Roman Joe and Josephine. Forget the glamorous depictions of marble villas and endless banquets. We're talking about the real deal, the nitty-gritty, the daily grind that kept the Roman Empire grinding. So you wake up. Or rather, you are jolted awake. Roosters? Nope. The incessant yelling of street vendors hawking their wares directly under your window. Bingo! Your apartment, a cramped insula, 6 stories up, is already vibrating with the city's cacophony. Sunlight, if you can even call it that, struggles to penetrate the grime-coated windows. Think of it like living above a particularly enthusiastic open-air market. Fun, right? Roll out of your straw-stuffed mattress. Ah, luxury. Today, hopefully you'll avoid bed bugs. The truly lucky might have a proper bed frame, but most commoners are sleeping on the floor, maybe with a thin blanket if the landlord's feeling generous. You stretch, wincing slightly. That dodgy staircase claimed another victim last night. Time for breakfast. It's not exactly a gourmet affair. Think stale bread dipped in watered-down wine, maybe with a bit of garlic or some olives if you're feeling fancy. Coffee? Avocado toast? Forget about it. We're talking subsistence living, folks. And honestly, you're probably just grabbing it on the go anyway. There's work to be done. Historians still argue whether Romans truly enjoyed their simple diet or secretly craved a good old-fashioned pizza. My money's on the pizza. What kind of work, you ask? Well, that depends on your status and skill. If you're lucky, you're a craftsman, a potter, a blacksmith, a carpenter. You might even own your own small workshop, employing a few slaves or apprentices. But more likely, you're a day laborer, hustling for whatever job you can find. Unloading cargo at the docks, hauling bricks for a construction project, cleaning latrines, yes, somebody had to do it. The work is backbreaking, the pay is meager, and the hours are long. You might earn just enough to keep yourself and your family afloat. And your family, they're probably just as busy as you are. Your wife, if you're married, and you probably are, is responsible for running the household, fetching water, cooking meals, mending clothes, and tending to the children. Water, by the way, is a precious commodity. You might have to trek to the nearest public fountain, battling crowds and dodging stray dogs, just to fill a few buckets. At least you don't have to boil it first. Silver linings, people. Speaking of children, they start working young. Little ones might help with household chores or run errands. Older kids might apprentice in a trade or work alongside their parents in the fields. Education is a luxury reserved for the wealthy elite. You might learn to read and write, maybe enough to keep accounts, but most commoners remain illiterate, which, to be fair, probably saves you from reading some truly dreadful propaganda carved into every public monument. Now, let's talk about those public monuments, shall we? Rome, despite its grimy underbelly, is a truly impressive city. Grand temples, soaring aqueducts, bustling forums, it's all a testament to Roman engineering and power. And you, the common citizen, are contributing to it, even if you're just hauling rocks or sweeping streets. One mainstream historical fact: the Colosseum, that iconic symbol of Roman power, could hold an estimated 50,000 to 80,000 spectators. Imagine the noise. But amidst the grandeur, there's also a constant undercurrent of danger. Disease is rampant. Crime is common. Fires are a perpetual threat, especially in those densely packed insulae. And political unrest is never far from the surface. Bread and circuses might keep the masses entertained, but they don't solve the underlying problems of poverty and inequality. You see, the Roman world is built on a rigid social hierarchy. At the top are the wealthy aristocrats, the senators, and the emperors, living in luxury and wielding immense power. At the bottom are the slaves, who have no rights and are treated as property. And in between are the commoners, the plebeians, struggling to survive and make a living. One quirky tidbit: it was considered bad luck to step on a threshold with your left foot. So every morning, you'd have to consciously remember to lead with your right. Imagine trying to navigate a crowded Roman street while simultaneously avoiding stepping on thresholds with your left foot. Talk about multitasking. After a long day of work, you might head to the public baths. It's a chance to wash off the grime, socialize with your neighbors, and maybe even catch up on the latest gossip. Think of it as the Roman equivalent of a community center, but with more naked people. These weren't just places to get cleaned. They were also places to exercise, play games, and even conduct business. A crucial part of the Roman social fabric. Dinner is another simple affair. Maybe some stew, some bread, and a bit more watered-down wine. Meat is a rare treat, reserved for special occasions. You might share your meal with your family, if you have one, or with your roommates in your cramped apartment. The atmosphere is probably loud and chaotic, but there's also a sense of community and camaraderie. After dinner, maybe you'll take a stroll through the city streets. The Roman night is alive with sounds and smells. The flickering of oil lamps, the chatter of merchants, the aroma of street food, the ever-present stench of, well, you get the picture. You might stop at a tavern for a drink or two, listen to some music, and maybe even gamble a few coins. Just try not to lose your tunic. That's happened to the best of us. Before you know it, the day is over, and it's time to head back to your insula and try to get some sleep before the whole thing starts all over again. You climb those stairs, carefully avoiding the loose steps, and collapse onto your straw-stuffed mattress. You close your eyes, trying to block out the noise and the smells. You dream of a better life, a life of ease and comfort. Maybe one day, you'll strike it rich, buy a villa in the countryside, and live like a senator. But for now, you're just a common Roman trying to survive another day in the greatest empire the world has ever known. Life expectancy, by the way, was significantly lower than it is today. Many Romans didn't live past their 30s or 40s. So you might be thinking, wow, all this work and hardship for what? Well, that's a good question. Maybe it was for the glory of Rome, maybe it was for the chance to leave a legacy, or maybe it was just for the sheer act of survival. And let's be honest, sometimes things just plain stunk. Like literally. Open sewers were a reality, and hygiene wasn't exactly a top priority. This leads to our next joke. Why did the Roman always carry a spoon? In case there was a long line at the cesspool. But even amidst the hardships, there was also a sense of pride and belonging. You were a Roman citizen, a member of a powerful and sophisticated civilization. You were part of something bigger than yourself, something that would endure for centuries. Historians still argue whether the common Roman truly felt a sense of loyalty to the empire, or whether they were simply resigned to their fate. But whatever their feelings, they were the backbone of Roman society, the ones who kept the wheels turning, the ones who built the roads, grew the food, and fought the wars. And that, my friends, is the daily grind of the common Roman. It's not always glamorous, it's not always easy, but it's a story worth telling. It's a reminder that behind every great empire, there are countless ordinary people struggling to survive and make a living. And in their struggles, we can find a reflection of our own lives, our own hopes, and our own dreams. Before I let you go, I must tell you about one last fringe tidbit. Some Romans believed that wearing a donkey's tooth around your neck would cure a fever. You can decide for yourself if that's legitimate. Alright, I'm starting to get sleepy. Let's see what we can find out next time. Alright, settle in, friend. Get comfy. We're about to swan dive into the ridiculously opulent world of wealthy Romans and their, shall we say, abundant leisure time. Imagine, if you will, a life where the biggest decision you face isn't whether to pay rent but whether to have the peacock brain pate or the flamingo tongue salad for dinner. Yeah, that's the life we're exploring. You trudge along the Via Appia, not because you have to, mind you, but because, well, why not? Your sandals, crafted from the softest Spanish leather and adorned with tiny pearls, because why not? Barely register the uneven cobblestones. A litter, carried by 4 sturdy slaves, who are definitely not having as leisurely a day as you, follows a respectful distance behind, laden with cushions and a chilled amphora of your favorite Falernian wine. You pause, inhaling the scent of jasmine and roasting dormice. An odd combination, perhaps, but hey, you didn't become a patrician by shying away from the unusual. You're not just wealthy, you're Roman wealthy. This means more than just having a hefty sestertius count. It means understanding the intricate dance of power, patronage, and performance that defines Roman society. It means throwing the most lavish banquets, sponsoring the most exciting chariot races, and generally making sure everyone knows exactly how important, and, crucially, how generous you are. Think of it as influencer culture, but with more togas and fewer selfies. Actually, scratch that. Wealthy Romans would totally have taken selfies if they'd had iPhones. Imagine the duck faces. And speaking of influencers, your reputation is paramount. You cultivate relationships with important senators, ensuring your continued access to lucrative government contracts. You donate generously to public works projects, earning the gratitude and votes of the plebeians. You even commissioned poets to write flattering verses about your, virtues. Because nothing says, humble, like a 20-stanza epic dedicated to your unparalleled generosity. You arrive at your villa, a sprawling estate that would make even the most jaded Californian architect weep with envy. Marble columns gleam in the afternoon sun, reflecting the turquoise waters of the meticulously manicured gardens. Slave artisans painstakingly arrange mosaics, depicting scenes from mythology and, of course, your own glorious achievements. Historians still argue whether these villas were truly meant for relaxation or were elaborate status symbols. But frankly, who cares when you're sipping wine by the pool? That pool, by the way, is heated and regularly scented with rose petals. Because you're worth it. Lunch is a multi-course affair, naturally. You recline on a plush couch, nibbling on stuffed dates, and listening to a lyre player strumming a soothing melody. Your slaves flit about, anticipating your every whim. One offers you a selection of imported cheeses, another presents a platter of roasted songbirds, and a third fans you with a peacock feather. It's all incredibly civilized and utterly absurd. You wonder idly if the songbird misses its family. Then you take another bite and decide it probably doesn't. After lunch, it's time for the baths. Not just a quick dip in the tub, mind you, but a full-blown ritual of cleansing, massage, and socializing. You progress through a series of rooms, each designed for a different temperature and purpose. First, the tepidarium, a warm room for gentle acclimatization. Then, the caldarium, a scorching hot sauna that leaves you dripping with sweat. Finally, the frigidarium, a plunge pool of ice-cold water that makes you gasp and shiver, but also, somehow, feel invigorated. Afterward, skilled masseuses knead your muscles with scented oils, relieving any lingering tension, presumably caused by the immense stress of managing your vast wealth. You float out of the baths feeling lighter than air, your skin glowing, and your mind blissfully empty. It's like a Roman spa day, except instead of Enya, they're probably listening to someone belting out an off-key rendition of Virgil. But life wasn't just endless pampering. Oh no! The Roman elite also had their intellectual pursuits. You might spend an afternoon perusing the scrolls in your extensive library, engaging in philosophical debates with learned scholars, who are, of course, also your paid clients. Or perhaps you'd attend a theatrical performance, laughing uproariously at the bawdy comedies of Plautus, while secretly hoping he doesn't base his next character on you. Maybe you even try your hand at writing poetry yourself, although the results are usually best kept private. There's also the matter of politics. You attend meetings of the Senate, listening intently or pretending to the endless debates about taxes, treaties, and the latest scandals involving the emperor's wife. You network with other senators, cultivating alliances and plotting strategies. Because in Rome, power is everything, and you're determined to maintain your grip on it. And if that means schmoozing and backstabbing, well, that's just part of the game. Speaking of games, the spectacles were a huge part of Roman life. You secure the best seats in the Colosseum for the gladiatorial contests, cheering on your favorite fighters as they battle to the death. You're not necessarily a sadist, well, maybe a little, but you appreciate the artistry and skill of the gladiators. Plus, it's a great opportunity to be seen by the masses, demonstrating your power and influence. Chariot races at the Circus Maximus are another must-see event. You bet heavily on your chosen team, basking in the roar of the crowd as the chariots thunder around the track. Win or lose, it's an adrenaline rush that leaves you feeling alive. Mainstream fact: chariot racing was so popular that factions like the Reds, Whites, Blues, and Greens had die-hard fans who would riot over race results. Of course, not all Romans were thrilled with this extravagant lifestyle. Some philosophers, like Seneca, railed against the excesses of the wealthy, arguing that true happiness could only be found in virtue and simplicity. but you, naturally, dismiss them as killjoys. After all, what's the point of having wealth if you can't flaunt it? It's like having a Ferrari and only driving it to church on Sundays. And then there are the fringe activities. Rumors swirl about secret cults, orgiastic rituals, and bizarre experiments with magic and alchemy. You may or may not participate in these clandestine gatherings yourself. After all, a little bit of mystery can be quite alluring. Plus, sometimes you just need a break from the endless parade of banquets and political intrigue. Quirky tidbit: some Roman nobles were rumored to have experimented with aphrodisiacs made from Spanish flies. Let's just say, proceed with caution. As the sun begins to set, you return to your villa, feeling thoroughly exhausted from your day of leisure. You dine on a light supper of sea urchins and honey cakes, while a slave reads aloud from Homer's Odyssey. You drift off to sleep, dreaming of marble statues, endless banquets, and the adoring cheers of the crowd. Historians still argue whether the opulence of the Roman elite contributed to the decline of the empire, but one thing is certain: they knew how to live the good life. Or at least a life. A life filled with excess, indulgence, and a healthy dose of self-importance. It's a fascinating, and slightly appalling, glimpse into a world where the only limit was one's imagination and one's bank account. And as you drift off to sleep, remember this: always check the flamingo tongues before you order. You never know where those birds have been. It's a foul situation if you don't. And don't forget to tip your slaves liberally, because a happy slave is a productive slave. Unless they're plotting your downfall, then, well, you've got bigger problems than a bad Yelp review. Sweet dreams. Okay, so you've made it this far. Your sandals are probably chafing, and you're questioning all your life choices that led you to this moment. But hey, chin up. You're about to enter the very soul of ancient Rome, the Roman Forum. Just breathe in. Yep, that's the distinct aroma of 2,000 years of history, sun-baked stone, and maybe a hint of pigeon. Don't worry, you'll get used to it. Or you'll go nose blind. You trudge through the archway, and bam! Ruins everywhere. It's less grand, imposing city, and more organized pile of rocks. But try to squint past the rubble and picture this place teeming with life. Imagine senators in togas gesticulating wildly as they argue about, well, probably taxes. Merchants hawking their wares, lawyers pleading cases, and, of course, legions of people gossiping about the latest scandals. Think of it as the ancient Roman equivalent of Twitter, only louder, smellier, and with significantly less cat content. This wasn't just a market, mind you. The Roman Forum was the place where decisions were made. It's where the Senate met, laws were passed, and justice, sometimes anyway, was dispensed. It was the central stage for triumphs and tragedies, for public speeches and political assassinations. Seriously, you could trip over a historical figure at any moment. Although, thankfully, they're all safely dead now. Walk with me, won't you? See that sprawling mess of brick and concrete over there? That's the Basilica Julia. Today, it's mostly foundations, but back in the day, it was a bustling courthouse and meeting hall. Built by Julius Caesar, although he didn't quite live to see it finished. Awkward. It was the place to be if you were involved in any kind of legal kerfuffle. Imagine the echoing pronouncements of judges, the hushed whispers of lawyers, and the dramatic sobs of defendants trying to convince the jury of their innocence. And knowing human nature, probably a few discreet card games in the back during particularly boring trials. And speaking of Caesar, let's wander over to the Temple of Caesar, marked by its altar. This is where Julius Caesar was cremated after his, shall we say, dramatic exit from life. Remember that whole ET2 brood thing? Yeah, it happened somewhere around here. The spot is often adorned with flowers even today, left by admirers who believe that, Whatever his flaws, Caesar did a lot for Rome. It's a poignant reminder that even the most powerful figures are ultimately mortal. Also, a good spot for a selfie. But maybe be respectful, okay? No duck faces. Now, a mainstream historical fact for you. The Roman Forum developed over centuries, starting as a marshy valley and gradually transforming into the political and social hub of the city. Emperors added their own monuments and buildings, each trying to outdo their predecessors in terms of grandeur and, well, sheer self-aggrandizement. It was all about leaving your mark, quite literally in stone. Here's a quirky tidbit, though. You see, not everything that happened in the Forum was serious or politically important. There were also less dignified events. For example, public executions were, unfortunately, fairly common. Also, believe it or not, the Forum was once the site of gladiatorial combats. Before the Colosseum was built, gladiators duked it out right here, in the heart of civic life. Can you imagine? Senators interrupting their debates to watch a good sword fight? Excuse me, are we voting on grain subsidies, or are we watching Marcus slice Lucius in half? Priorities, people. Historians still argue whether the Forum was truly a space of open civic participation or more of a carefully controlled stage managed by the ruling elite. Was it a place where the voice of the people could be heard, or just a carefully curated illusion of democracy? You could easily argue that both are true. Next, feast your eyes on the Temple of Saturn. Those towering columns you see are all that remains of this ancient structure, dedicated to the god of agriculture and wealth. It also served as the state treasury, so it was basically the ancient Roman equivalent of Fort Knox. Think about all the gold, silver, and valuable documents that were stored within those walls. I wonder what the security system was like back then. Probably just a really angry guy with a sword. But here's a question for you. If you could raid any historical treasury, which one would you choose? I'm thinking the Temple of Saturn, obviously. Maybe just a little souvenir or two. For historical purposes, of course. Now, a mainstream historical fact. The Via Sacra, or Sacred Way, ran through the heart of the Forum. This was the main processional route, used for religious ceremonies, triumphal parades, and other important events. Imagine the pomp and circumstance, the colorful banners, the blaring trumpets, and the sheer spectacle of a Roman triumph. It must have been quite a sight. A quirky, fringe tidbit for you. Some scholars believe that the Via Sacra was not just a road, but also a kind of symbolic representation of the cosmos. They argue that its alignment with the sun and stars, and its connection to various temples and sacred sites, suggest a deeper, more spiritual significance. It's kind of like an ancient Roman version of ley lines, if you're into that sort of thing. Or maybe it was just a road. You decide. Historians still argue whether the decline of the Roman Forum reflected a broader decline in Roman civic life and political participation. Did the Forum lose its importance as the empire became more centralized and autocratic? Or did it simply evolve into a different kind of space, reflecting the changing needs and priorities of the Roman people? Now, you may be asking yourself, where did all of the Forum's building materials go? What you see now is only a fraction of what it once was. Well, after the fall of the Roman Empire, the Forum was essentially abandoned. Over time, it was looted, pillaged, and cannibalized for its materials. Marble columns became church facades. Stone blocks became foundations for new buildings. It was a sad end for what was once the center of the world. It's kind of like that feeling when you clean out your childhood bedroom and realize that all those things you once treasured are now just clutter. Except, in this case, the clutter is a 2,000-year-old civilization. One more mainstream historical fact for you. The rediscovery and excavation of the Roman Forum began in the 18th and 19th centuries. Archaeologists painstakingly piece together the fragments of the past, revealing the secrets of this once great city. It's a process that continues to this day, as new discoveries are constantly being made. So who knows? Maybe you could be the one to unearth the next major Roman artifact. Although, probably not. Let's be honest, you'd probably just trip over a rock. But hey, even tripping over a rock in the Roman Forum is more interesting than, I don't know, filing your taxes. And finally, a fringe tidbit to leave you with. Some believe that the Roman Forum is still haunted by the ghosts of its past. They claim to have seen apparitions of senators, gladiators, and even Julius Caesar himself wandering among the ruins. Do you believe in ghosts? I don't know, but if I were a ghost, the Roman Forum would definitely be my hangout spot. Think of all the juicy gossip I could eavesdrop on. But then, I'd probably start haunting the gelato place. So there you have it, a whirlwind tour of the Roman Forum. Hopefully you've learned something, or at least been mildly entertained. And if not, well, at least you got some exercise. And hopefully a funny anecdote or two to annoy your friends and family with over dinner. Historians still argue whether the Forum, even in ruins, holds lessons for us today about power, politics, and the rise and fall of civilizations. Can we learn from the mistakes of the past? Or are we doomed to repeat them, building our own empires and watching them crumble into dust? The Forum stands as a silent witness to history, a reminder that nothing lasts forever. Except maybe those darn pigeons. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's talk about getting clean. Or at least, the Roman version of clean. Because let's be honest, standards differed a little. You might be surprised how central bathing was to Roman life, and I promise, it wasn't just about getting rid of the chariot grease. You wake up, maybe a little stiff from sleeping on that not-so-ergonomic Roman couch. The sun is, hopefully, shining, or, struggling to penetrate the ever-present smog of a bustling city. You consider your day, and just like any self-respecting Roman, at least, one who can afford it, you think, thermi, public baths. Forget your morning shower. This is an event. Think spa day, social club, and questionable hygiene practices all rolled into one. You trudge, and I mean trudge, because those cobblestones are murder on your feet, towards the nearest thermi. There are options, of course. Different sizes, different levels of fanciness. Some are privately owned, little more than glorified hot tubs. Others are colossal imperial structures, monuments to Roman engineering and, well, let's just say emperors liked showing off. Caracalla's baths, for instance, could supposedly accommodate 1,600 bathers simultaneously. 1,600? Imagine the lost sandals. And the shared soap bar situation? A hygiene nightmare, truly. As you approach, the air shifts. The smells of wood smoke, heating those enormous boilers, exotic oils, and, let's be honest, a faint undercurrent of human being all hit you at once. It's a vibrant, if slightly overwhelming, olfactory experience. You pay your entrance fee, a pittance, really, for the average citizen, and hand over your clothes to the capsarius, the bath attendant. Hopefully, he's honest. There are tales of stolen tunics and switched sandals aplenty. Consider investing in a lockbox, or maybe just befriending the capsarius. A little flattery goes a long way. Now, you're in the apoditerium, the changing room. This is where the fun and the awkwardness begins. Men and women generally bathe separately, although, like all rules, there were exceptions and periods where things got a little relaxed. Imagine a gym locker room, but with more marble and less deodorant. People are gossiping, stretching, flexing, because why not? And generally preparing for the ritual. You strip down, trying not to make eye contact with anyone, especially the really ripped guy doing bicep curls, and grab your strigil, a curved metal scraper. This is your main weapon against grime. From the apoditerium, you move into the tepidarium, the warm room. It's a transition zone, preparing your body for the heat to come. The floor is heated from below by the hypocaust, a sophisticated system of furnaces and channels circulating hot air. The air is thick and humid, and your skin starts to prickle. People are milling about, chatting, gently sweating. It's like a human marinade, slowly tenderizing before the real cooking begins. Next comes the caldarium, the hot room. This is where things get serious. The air is scorching, almost unbearable at first. You tentatively dip a toe into the hot pool and wince. Then, with a sigh of resignation, you plunge in. It's like being immersed in a giant cup of tea. Your muscles relax, your pores open, and you begin to sweat profusely. This is where the strigil comes into its own. You scrape away the dirt, oil, and grime that's accumulated throughout the day. It's surprisingly satisfying. Imagine power washing your own body, but with a dull metal instrument. While you're doing that, you notice the other bathers around you. There are people of all ages and social classes, from wealthy patricians to humble plebeians. Bathing was a great social equalizer. Everyone, for a brief time, was just another sweaty body in a hot tub. You might see senators discussing politics, merchants haggling over prices, or simply groups of friends gossiping about the latest scandals. The Thermae was a hub of social interaction, a place to see and be seen. But the Romans didn't just bathe. They also exercised. Many Thermae had gymnasia, where you could lift weights, wrestle, play ball games, or even box. Imagine getting pummeled after steaming your pores open. Sounds invigorating, right? Historians still argue whether the emphasis on physical activity in the Thermae contributed significantly to the Roman military prowess, or if it was merely a way to show off your pecs. It's probably a bit of both. After the caldarium, you retreat to the frigidarium, the cold room. This is the shock to the system, the icy plunge that supposedly closes your pores and invigorates your body. You brace yourself, take a deep breath, and jump into the cold pool. It's like being stabbed with 1,000 tiny icicles. You gasp, shriek internally, of course. Nobody wants to be that person, and quickly scramble out. Supposedly, this is good for you. Supposedly, I suspect it was just another Roman way of proving their toughness. Finally, you return to the tepidarium to cool down gradually. You might get a massage. The Romans were big fans of massage, often using fragrant oils and unguents. Or you might simply relax, chatting with friends or reading a scroll. The Thermae wasn't just about getting clean. It was about relaxing, socializing, and taking a break from the stresses of daily life. Some even had libraries. Who needs Netflix when you have scrolls and communal sweat? After you're completely dry and relaxed, you head back to the apoditerium, retrieve your clothes, hopefully they're still yours, and get dressed. You emerge from the Thermae feeling refreshed, invigorated, and, hopefully, a little cleaner than when you went in. The smell of wood smoke and exotic oils clings to your skin. You're ready to face the day, or at least ready for a nap. Now, here's a slightly less glamorous tidbit. Not everyone could afford to visit the public baths. For the poorest Romans, bathing was a much less frequent and less luxurious affair. They might wash in public fountains or rivers, or simply rely on the occasional rainstorm. Cleanliness was definitely a class issue. And of course, the Thermae weren't always the cleanest places themselves. Shared water, shared towels, shared strigils. Let's just say that outbreaks of skin infections were not uncommon. But hey, at least you were socializing while contracting ringworm. And here's a quirky one. Some Thermae even had dedicated vomitariums. Yep, you read that right. While the popular misconception is that these were rooms to deliberately purge after excessive feasting, some historians believe they were simply large latrines strategically placed for post-bathing needs, whatever those might be. The debate rages on. fueling countless academic conferences and slightly awkward dinner party conversations. So there you have it, a glimpse into the Roman bathing experience. It was more than just a way to get clean. It was a social ritual, a cultural institution, and a fascinating insight into the daily lives of the ancient Romans. And let's be honest, maybe a little bit gross by modern standards. But hey, at least they were trying. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go take a long, solitary, and very modern shower. Good night. You trudge through the cobblestone streets, the morning mist clinging to your cloak like a lovesick ghost. The air, thick with the smells of wood smoke and unwashed bodies, is a far cry from the lavender-scented candles burning in the Queen's chambers, isn't it? But hey, we're not visiting the palace today. Today, we're diving deep into the heart of medieval society, and specifically, into its stomach. Because let's face it, what's more revealing than a person's lunch? Let's start with the folks who had it all. The nobles, the knights, the landed gentry. They weren't exactly slumming it when it came to their midday repast. Imagine, if you will, a long, heavy oak table laden with roasted meats. We're talking whole boars, glistening with fat and herbs, presented with a flourish. Peacocks, maybe, their iridescent feathers artfully rearranged after cooking, because why not? Serving presentation was key. Think medieval Instagram food bloggers, but with significantly worse lighting and hygiene. These feasts weren't just about sustenance, they were about power. The sheer quantity of food on display, the exotic spices that flavored it, the number of servants attending to every whim, all of it screamed wealth and status. It was a performance, a way to reinforce the social hierarchy with every juicy bite. And don't even get me started on the wine. Forget that weak, watery stuff you'd get at your uncle's summer barbecue. These guys were swilling down vintage wines from France and Italy, imported at great expense. It was a boozy business, this whole being rich thing. Did they ever get anything done? Now, while we're envisioning this decadent spread, let's not forget the details. There would be trenchers, thick slices of stale bread used as plates. The bread would soak up all the flavorful juices, and at the end of the meal, you could either eat the trencher or, more likely, toss it to the dogs or the poor who hovered hopefully nearby. Resourceful, if not exactly sanitary, right? And forks? Please. Knives and spoons were the utensils of choice, and fingers were perfectly acceptable for everything else. Imagine the hand-washing situation. I'll just leave that thought with you. Mainstream historical fact alert. Did you know that the medieval diet of the wealthy was incredibly high in protein and fat? This contributed to health problems later in life, like gout, the affliction of kings, literally, and other maladies related to overindulgence. So, while they might have lived like royalty, they often died because of it. Irony. Moving on, let's talk about the quirks. One particularly odd custom involved the use of subtleties. These weren't whispered insults, but elaborate edible sculptures made of sugar paste or marzipan. They often depicted allegorical scenes or political figures, and were designed to impress and entertain. Imagine a whole sugary rendition of a jousting tournament sitting on your table. Edible art, a feast for the eyes and, eventually, the stomach. It's like a medieval version of those elaborate cake shows, but instead of fondant, they were dealing with a medieval pantry. Sounds interesting. Historians still argue whether these displays were purely for show or if they held deeper symbolic meaning. Some believe they were coded messages, subtle ways to express political opinions or social critiques without risking open rebellion. Others think they were simply extravagant displays of wealth and artistic skill. Perhaps it was a little of both. Now, let's wander away from the castle and venture into the village, where the aroma is decidedly less peacock-y. For the vast majority of the population, the peasants, the laborers, the craftsmen, lunch was a far more humble affair. You know, they definitely didn't have the luxury of lounging around for 3 hours while someone sang to them about the greatness of their family tree. Their midday meal was dictated by the rhythm of the day, often snatched between chores in the fields or workshops. Imagine your lunch. It was probably something brought from home in a small, sturdy container. Maybe a hunk of coarse bread, dark and dense, made from whatever grains were available. Perhaps a bit of cheese, if they were lucky enough to own a cow or goat. And vegetables? Mostly whatever was in season and readily available. Turnips, onions, leeks, maybe some cabbage. Think simple, hearty, and filling. Meat was a rare treat for most peasants. Maybe a bit of salted pork or bacon, if they were fortunate enough to slaughter a pig in the autumn. Hunting was generally reserved for the nobility, so poaching was a risky business. You might end up in the stocks, or worse, if you were caught with a stolen rabbit. Talk about a bad hair day. Mainstream historical fact. The medieval peasant diet was primarily vegetarian, due to the expense and scarcity of meat. This meant they relied heavily on grains, vegetables, and legumes for sustenance. It wasn't necessarily a choice, it was a necessity. For the poor, the main source of nutrition came from pottage, a thick soup or stew made from whatever ingredients they could find. This might include grains, vegetables, herbs, and occasionally a bit of meat or bone for flavor. Pottage was cooked in a large pot over the fire and simmered for hours, providing a warm and nourishing meal, especially during the cold winter months. Talk about one-pot wonder, huh? Now, for a quirky tidbit, did you know that medieval peasants often ate with their hands? Just like their wealthier counterparts, forks were a rarity, and knives were mainly used for cutting. They would use their fingers to scoop up their pottage or tear off pieces of bread. While some historians believe the peasants were very dirty and messy at this time, other historians claim the peasants were cleaner than their wealthy counterparts, bathing more frequently because they worked under the sunlight more. Historians still argue whether the peasant diet was sufficient to meet their nutritional needs. Some argue that it was monotonous and lacking in essential vitamins and minerals, leading to health problems and shorter lifespans. Others point out that peasants were often incredibly strong and resilient, capable of performing strenuous physical labor day after day. Perhaps the key was the sheer quantity of food they consumed, even if it wasn't the most balanced diet. Maybe they were just built different. So what does all this tell us? It tells us that food, even in the Middle Ages, was a powerful symbol of social status and economic disparity. The wealthy indulged in extravagant feasts, while the poor scraped by on simple, filling meals. The contrast between the two worlds is stark and undeniable. As you trudge back through the medieval streets, the smells of cooking fires and dung mingling in the air, remember what you've learned. Remember the peacock feathers and the sugar sculptures, the pottage and the coarse bread. Remember that lunch, even then, was more than just a meal. It was a window into a world of privilege and hardship, of power and survival. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's get comfy. Imagine with me, if you will, the roar of the crowd, the baking sun on your face. Yeah, we're going to ancient Rome, baby. Specifically, we're diving headfirst into the spectacle, the blood, the sand. We're going to the gladiatorial games. You trudge through the throng, a sea of togas, tunics, and surprisingly well-maintained sandals for this level of chaos. The air hangs thick with the smell of sweat, cheap wine, and, well, something vaguely resembling cooked meat. Hopefully, that's lunch and not a premonition. You navigate past hawkers selling programs. Gotta know who to bet on, right? And the occasional Roman citizen loudly proclaiming their undying love for emperor. Let's say Claudius, because why not? He did love a good spectacle, that guy. Historians still argue whether his passion was genuine or a carefully constructed political image, but who are we to judge? You secured a decent seat, not too far from the action, not too close to the, shall we say, aftermath. The Colosseum looms before you, a monument to Roman engineering and, let's be honest, a whole lot of dead guys. You can feel the energy buzzing through the stone, a palpable excitement that's been building for days. It's like the Super Bowl, but with significantly more chances of actual mortal combat. The games are about to begin. A hush falls over the crowd, a momentary pause before the storm. Trumpets blare, a fanfare so loud it vibrates in your chest. The procession begins, a parade of gladiators, their armor gleaming in the sun. Some are seasoned veterans, their faces etched with scars and experience. Others are fresh-faced, probably terrified, and very likely regretting every life choice that led them to this point. They march past the emperor's box, offering the traditional salute. Ave Caesar, morituri te salutem. Hail Caesar. Those who are about to die salute you. A bit dramatic, perhaps, but hey, gotta commit to the bit, right? Now, I know what you're thinking. Gladiators, muscled heroes, fighting for glory and the adoration of the crowd. Well, kinda. The reality was a bit more complicated. Many gladiators were slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals condemned to the arena. They didn't exactly choose this career path. It was more like the career path chose them, usually with a swift kick to the backside. But not all gladiators were forced into the arena. Some were free men who voluntarily signed up, lured by the promise of fame, fortune, and surprisingly good medical care. Seriously, gladiator training schools, Ludi, were basically the ancient Roman version of a high-performance athletic facility. They had doctors, trainers, nutritionists. Okay, maybe not nutritionists in the modern sense, but they definitely made sure the gladiators got enough protein. Historians still argue about the specific diets of gladiators, but evidence suggests they ate a primarily vegetarian diet, which is kinda ironic considering what they were doing for a living. You know, killing people. And speaking of killing people, the fights are about to start. The first bout is between a retiarius, a gladiator armed with a net and trident, and a secutor, who is heavily armored with a large shield, and a gladius, a short sword. The retiarius darts around, trying to entangle his opponent, while the secutor lumbers forward, a heavily armed tank. It's like watching a really aggressive game of cat and mouse, only the mouse has a pointy stick and the cat wants to eat him. The crowd is going wild, chanting and cheering for their favorites. You can feel the adrenaline pumping, even though you're just a spectator. It's a primal experience, a raw display of strength and skill, and a whole lot of violence. But hey, you came to see a show, didn't you? The retiarius manages to ensnare the secutor in his net, pulling him off balance. The secutor crashes to the ground, his helmet coming loose. The retiarius moves in for the kill, raising his trident, but the secutor manages to roll away, scrambling to his feet. The fight continues, a brutal dance of near misses and desperate lunges. Finally, the secutor manages to land a blow, his gladius finding its mark. The retiarius falls to the sand, wounded and defeated. The crowd roars its approval. The secutor stands over his fallen opponent, awaiting the emperor's decision. Thumbs up? The retiarius lives, spared to fight another day. Thumbs down? Well, let's just say it's not a good day to be a retiarius. In our hypothetical scenario, Claudius, being the benevolent ruler we've decided he is for the purposes of this narrative, gives a thumbs up. The crowd cheers, the retiarius is helped to his feet, and the next fight is announced. The gladiatorial games weren't just about the fighting, though. They were a complex social and political event. They were a way for the emperor to show off his wealth and power, to entertain the masses, and to distract them from, the actual problems of the Roman Empire. It's like throwing a really lavish party when your economy is on the brink of collapse. Except at this party, people die. Fun, right? And here's a weird one. Gladiators, despite their often grim circumstances, were strangely popular. Some became celebrities, their faces appearing on mosaics and graffiti. Women would even collect their sweat. I did say weird, right? Believing it to be an aphrodisiac. Talk about an extreme fandom. The games continue throughout the day, a constant stream of blood, sweat, and sand. You see fights between different types of gladiators. The Murmillo, heavily armored with a fish-crested helmet. The Thrax, armed with a curved sword and a small shield. The Hoplomachus, mimicking Greek hoplites. Each had their own style, their own strengths and weaknesses. It was like a really violent version of rock, paper, scissors. You even witnessed a venatio, a hunt featuring exotic animals. Lions, tigers, bears, oh my! They were brought from all corners of the empire to be slaughtered in the arena. It was a display of Roman power and dominion over the natural world. It was also, let's face it, a massive waste of resources and a pretty cruel thing to do to a bunch of animals. But hey, nobody ever accused the Romans of being particularly environmentally conscious. Maybe that's why their empire fell. Karma's a gladiator, right? As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the arena, the final fight is announced. It's a grudge match, a battle between two gladiators who have been rivals for years. The crowd is on its feet, screaming and chanting. The atmosphere is electric. This is what they've been waiting for. The two gladiators face each other, their eyes locked in a deadly stare. They circle each other cautiously, testing their opponent's defenses. The tension is almost unbearable. You could cut it with a gladius, probably. Suddenly, the fight explodes. A flurry of blows, a clash of steel, a dance of death. One gladiator stumbles, his armor dented, his breath ragged. The other presses his advantage, relentlessly attacking. The crowd roars its approval, urging him on. The wounded gladiator falls to his knees, his head bowed in defeat. His opponent stands over him, his sword raised high. The crowd falls silent, waiting for the final blow. It is here, where the fate of the fallen hangs on the whim of the crowd. But then, something unexpected happens. The emperor, Claudius, rises to his feet. He looks out at the crowd, his face unreadable. He pauses for a moment, then gives a thumbs up. The crowd erupts in cheers. The wounded gladiator is spared. He has earned their respect, their admiration, even in defeat. You breathe a sigh of relief. It's over. The games are over. You stand up, stretching your cramped muscles. The Colosseum empties slowly, the crowd dispersing into the streets of Rome. You walk away, your senses still buzzing. You've witnessed a spectacle of incredible proportions, a brutal and fascinating glimpse into the world of ancient Rome. You've seen courage, skill, violence, and a strange kind of glory. You've seen life and death played out on a grand stage. It was, pretty metal, honestly. I mean, you would not catch me in the Colosseum, even if they offered me free tickets, but it was an experience. You trudge away, pondering what you would order. The vaguely resembling cooked meat. Stall is not an option this evening. All right, settle in, friend. Let's step away from the roar of the Colosseum for a moment, shall we? That dust and blood can really do a number on your complexion. You're probably craving something a little different. Something perhaps a tad more refined? Or maybe just something that doesn't involve quite so much potential dismemberment. Lucky for you, Rome had options. Think of it like channel surfing, only instead of a remote, you've got a sandal, and instead of Netflix, you've got, well, everything else. You just spent your denarius on tickets to see gladiators bash each other's skulls in. Now what? You trudge out of the arena, the echoes of the crowd still ringing in your ears. Maybe you're feeling invigorated, ready to tackle your daily bread baking with renewed vigor. Or maybe, just maybe, you're feeling a little numb, a little empty, a little like you need a good laugh. And where do Romans go for a good laugh? The theater, of course. You find yourself drawn to the awnings and colorful banners announcing the latest theatrical productions. It's a far cry from the brutal spectacle you just witnessed. Here, on a raised stage, actors in elaborate costumes prance and declaim, their voices booming across the open-air auditorium. Comedy was huge. Like, Laugh Until Your Sides Ache huge. Plays by Plautus and Terence were all the rage. Think of Plautus as the Roman equivalent of, like, a slightly raunchier sitcom writer. Slapstick, mistaken identities, ridiculous situations, he had it all. Terence, on the other hand, was a bit more sophisticated. Witty dialogue, subtle social commentary. He was basically the Shakespeare of Roman sitcoms, but with fewer soliloquies about existential angst and more about, say, a guy accidentally marrying his long-lost sister. Awkward. Now, these weren't exactly high-budget affairs. The sets were minimal, the costumes often recycled from previous productions, and the special effects, well, let's just say they relied heavily on the audience's imagination. But hey, that's part of the charm, right? A little bit of theatrical John-keenness never hurt anyone. Except maybe the guy who got hit with a prop pineapple during a particularly enthusiastic performance of The Braggart Soldier. That's Plautus, by the way. Hilarious. But let's be honest, not everyone was a fan of highbrow, or even lowbrow comedy. Some Romans wanted something a little dirtier, something a little more saucy. Enter the mimes. Imagine a sort of vaudeville act, but with more suggestive dancing and even more suggestive wordplay. These performances were often improvised, relying heavily on audience participation and, shall we say, mature themes. Think of it as the Roman equivalent of a really edgy open mic night. The mimes was often considered lowbrow entertainment. Many of the performers were women, and their performances were, well, let's just say they pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable. Some historians still argue whether these performances were simply harmless fun or a reflection of a more permissive attitude towards sexuality in Roman society. Regardless, they were wildly popular. Moving on, let's consider another form of popular entertainment in Rome, pantomime. You may think of silent clowns with painted faces, but this was a different animal altogether. Roman pantomime was a sophisticated form of storytelling through dance and gesture, often accompanied by music and song. It was a one-man or one-woman show where the performer would portray multiple characters, weaving intricate narratives through their movements. Think of it as interpretive dance, but with more drama and less lycra. The stars of pantomime were incredibly famous. They were celebrities, adored and mobbed by fans. They were also known to be incredibly vain and temperamental. One particularly famous pantomime artist, Pylades, was known for his rivalry with another performer named Hylas. Their fans would often brawl in the streets, turning theater-going into something akin to a modern-day sporting event, but with more dramatic flair and less face paint, usually. But what if you're not really into live performances? What if you're more of an introvert? A Roman wallflower who prefers to spend their evenings curled up with a good scroll? Well, you might be surprised to learn that reading was actually quite popular in ancient Rome, at least among the educated elite. Books were expensive, of course, handwritten on papyrus scrolls. You wouldn't exactly find a Roman version of Barnes and Noble on every corner, but there were libraries, both public and private. Imagine yourself strolling through the cool, marble halls of a Roman library, the air thick with the scent of papyrus and beeswax. You carefully unroll a scroll, its text meticulously written in neat, even lines. Maybe you're reading Virgil's Aeneid, a sweeping epic poem about the founding of Rome. Or perhaps you're delving into the philosophical musings of Seneca, pondering the meaning of life and the inevitability of death. Or maybe you're just reading some trashy romance novel hidden inside a scroll about agricultural techniques. Nobody's judging. Of course, reading wasn't just about escaping into fictional worlds or grappling with weighty philosophical questions. It was also a status symbol. The ability to read and write was a mark of education and refinement. It separated you from the masses. Think of it as the ancient Roman equivalent of having a PhD. And if you weren't particularly inclined to read, you could always hire someone to read for you. Lectors, or public readers, were a common sight in Roman society. They would read aloud to groups of people, sharing news, literature, and even political propaganda. Think of them as the ancient Roman equivalent of audiobooks, but with more dramatic flair and fewer royalty payments. But let's be real. Not everyone had the time or the inclination for highbrow pursuits like reading. Some Romans just wanted to relax and unwind. And how did they do that? Well, they went to the baths, of course. The Roman baths were more than just places to get clean. They were social hubs, community centers, and even proto-spas. You could soak in hot tubs, swim in pools, get a massage, work out in the gymnasium, or simply hang out and chat with your friends. Think of them as the ancient Roman equivalent of a modern-day YMCA, but with more naked people and less chlorine. The baths were also a great place to gossip. Rumors and scandals were traded as freely as towels and strigils, those scraping tools they used to clean themselves. It was basically the ancient Roman equivalent of a water cooler meeting, but with more nudity and fewer HR complaints. Beyond the theater, the baths, and the libraries, there were other forms of entertainment to be found in Rome. You might stumble upon a street performer juggling flaming torches, or a traveling musician playing a lively tune on a flute. You might even witness a public execution, which, while gruesome, was undeniably a form of entertainment for some. Morbid, I know. And let's not forget the ever-popular chariot races, which took place at the Circus Maximus. These races were incredibly dangerous, with drivers risking life and limb for the thrill of victory. But they were also incredibly popular, drawing huge crowds of spectators. Some historians still argue whether the chariot races were more about the sport itself or a vehicle for political maneuvering. So you see, life in ancient Rome wasn't just about gladiatorial combat and political intrigue. There were plenty of other ways to entertain yourself, from the highbrow to the lowbrow, the refined to the ridiculous. Whether you were a fan of comedy, pantomime, reading, or simply hanging out at the baths, there was something for everyone. Now, if you'll excuse me, all this talking about relaxation has made me sleepy. Time for a well-deserved nap, perhaps with a little bit of Plautus playing softly in the background. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's dim the lights a bit, maybe grab a lavender sachet, because tonight we're diving deep into the fascinating, often baffling, world of Roman religious practices and superstitions. And trust me, you'll need all the relaxation you can get because these folks took their deities very seriously. Think of it as spiritual aromatherapy, Roman style. You find yourself in ancient Rome. Imagine the hustle and bustle, the clatter of chariot wheels, the hawkers yelling their wares, the pervasive smell of, well, a lot of things, not all of them pleasant, let's be honest. Woven into this vibrant tapestry of daily life is a profound sense of the divine. Every aspect of your existence, from the rising of the sun to the success of your crops, is intimately connected to the whims and favors of the gods. Now you might be thinking, gods? Plural? Sounds complicated. And you wouldn't be wrong. The Roman pantheon, you see, was a veritable who's who of celestial influencers, each with their own portfolio, personality quirks, and, crucially, demands. We're talking Jupiter, king of the gods, wielding lightning bolts and overseeing the whole shebang. Then there's Juno, his wife, the queen of the gods, fiercely protective of women in marriage. Neptune ruled the seas, a perpetually grumpy dude with a trident, probably because he was always damp. And don't even get me started on Mars, the god of war, who seemed to solve every problem with, well, more problems. You know that guy. You see, Romans weren't picky. They were open to all faiths. This is because religious pluralism was a key aspect of Roman society. As Rome expanded, they happily incorporated the gods and goddesses of conquered peoples into their own pantheon. It's like a spiritual merger, adding extra perks to the insurance plan. It's a very, the more, the merrier, approach to the divine, which is either incredibly tolerant or incredibly indecisive, depending on how you look at it. You approach a small shrine, perhaps in your own home or on a street corner. These Lararia were dedicated to the household gods, the Laras and Penates. Think of them as the divine equivalent of your friendly neighborhood watch, protecting your family and home. You offer a small libation, maybe some wine, a bit of food, or even just a pinch of incense. It's a simple act, a daily acknowledgement of their presence and influence. You wouldn't want to anger the Laras, would you? Imagine your toast always landing jelly side down, or your sandals constantly getting untied. The horror! But it wasn't all just about small gestures. The Romans also engaged in grand, elaborate public rituals. Think processions with priests in flowing robes, animal sacrifices, lots and lots of animal sacrifices. Think of it as ancient Roman barbecue, only less appetizing for the animal involved, and theatrical performances dedicated to the gods. These festivals were massive events, bringing together people from all walks of life in a shared display of piety and community spirit. It's like the world's first block party, but instead of awkward small talk with your neighbors, you're offering a bull to Jupiter. You attend one of these festivals, feeling the energy of the crowd, the rhythmic chanting of the priests, the heady scent of incense and roasted meat. You observe the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest, leading the ceremony with solemn gravitas. It's impressive, awe-inspiring, and maybe just a little bit overwhelming. You wonder if the gods actually appreciate all this pomp and circumstance, or if they're just rolling their celestial eyes. And speaking of eyes, you glance nervously at the haruspects, the diviner, examining the entrails of a sacrificed animal. This was serious business. The haruspects was believed to be able to read the will of the gods in the organs of the deceased creature. A blemish on the liver? A sign of impending doom? A perfectly formed heart? A blessing from the heavens? It's like a cosmic fortune cookie, only much, much messier. Historians still argue whether these divinations were based on genuine belief, shrewd observation, or just plain guesswork designed to please, or terrify, the ruling elite. But the Roman relationship with religion wasn't all lofty temples and bloody sacrifices. It was also deeply intertwined with superstition. You see people wearing amulets to ward off the evil eye, whispering incantations to protect themselves from curses, and consulting astrologers to chart their destinies. It's like a spiritual safety net, a way to exert some control over a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. You notice a neighbor carefully avoiding a black cat crossing her path. Superstitions, you see, were everywhere. Sneezing, for example, was considered an omen. 1 sneeze, good luck. 2 sneezes, bad luck. 3 sneezes, time to consult a physician, or maybe just invest in some tissues. And don't even think about getting married in May. That was practically a guarantee of marital discord. Seriously, the Romans had a superstition for everything, and they took them very seriously. It's like living in a world constantly governed by cosmic what-ifs. You also see people consulting astrologers. Astrology was immensely popular, and people believe that the positions of the stars and planets at the time of their birth influence their personalities and destinies. It's like a celestial personality test, only with more ancient wisdom, and probably a hefty consultation fee. And if your chart looked particularly grim, well, you could always try appeasing the gods with more offerings. Just saying. Now, here's a fun fact. Romans didn't have birthdays like we do. They celebrated Dies Natalis, which was not your birthday, but the anniversary of the dedication of the temple of the god that was your protector. No presents, no cake, just a solemn trip to a temple. Who needs cake when you have divine protection, right? Speaking of protection, amulets were all the rage. You might wear a bulla, a small pendant containing protective charms, to ward off evil spirits or bad luck. The bulla was particularly popular among children, and it was thought to protect them from harm. It's like a tiny, portable force field, shielding you from the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Or, just playground bullies. And then there were curses. Romans took cursing very seriously. They even had curse tablets, small pieces of lead inscribed with spells intended to harm their enemies. These tablets were often buried in the graves of the dead, in the belief that the spirits of the deceased would carry the curse to the underworld. It's like ancient Roman trolling, only with potentially devastating consequences. One wonders what they would do with social media. You overhear whispers about secret cults dedicated to deities like Mithras or Isis. These mystery religions offered a more personal and intimate connection with the divine, often involving initiation rituals and secret knowledge. It's like the ancient Roman version of a secret society, complete with passwords, handshakes, and potentially awkward potluck dinners. In fact, Mithraism became incredibly popular among soldiers. Historians still argue whether these cults posed a threat to the established Roman order, or if they simply provided a much-needed sense of community and belonging in a vast and impersonal empire. You reflect on the sheer complexity and diversity of Roman religious life. It was a blend of grand public ceremonies, intimate household rituals, deeply held superstitions, and secret, mysterious cults. It was a world where the divine was woven into the fabric of everyday existence, shaping people's beliefs, actions, and destinies. It's like living in a constant state of spiritual awareness, where every sneeze, every dream, every encounter could be interpreted as a sign from the gods. But as time marches on, whispers of a new religion begin to circulate, a religion that challenges the very foundations of the Roman pantheon. Christianity, with its message of one God, of love, forgiveness, and eternal life, begins to attract followers, slowly but steadily undermining the old order. It's like a spiritual tectonic shift, gradually reshaping the landscape of Roman belief. You wonder what the future holds. Will the old gods continue to reign supreme? Or will this new faith triumph, ushering in a new era? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. The world of Roman religion and superstition is a fascinating and complex one, a testament to the enduring human need to find meaning and purpose in the face of the unknown. All right, friend, settle in, because the day isn't over yet. You've survived the hustle and bustle of Roman life, the bartering in the forum, the questionable chariot races, maybe even dodged a rogue gladiator or two. Your toga is probably a mess, and you're definitely ready for a sit-down. Thankfully, the Roman day is winding down, and that means dinner, or cena, as they call it. Think of it as the ancient world's version of Netflix and chill, except instead of a screen, you've got flickering oil lamps, and instead of a fridge full of takeout, you've got, well, we'll get to that. You trudge back towards your domus, or maybe your cramped apartment if you're not quite in the patrician set. Either way, the evening air is cooling, a welcome change from the midday heat. The streets, once teeming with activity, are now quieter, save for the occasional merchant still hawking their wares or the distant sound of music drifting from a nearby tavern. You can almost smell the roasting chestnuts from a vendor further down the street, a small comfort in the growing darkness. Don't get any ideas about grabbing a handful though, unless you want to test the vendor's generosity, which, let's be honest, is probably about as generous as a tax collector. The evening meal in Rome wasn't just about stuffing your face. It was a social event, a chance to unwind and catch up with friends and family. It was a whole vibe. Think of it as a potluck meets a therapy session, ancient style. If you were well-to-do, the cena was a lavish affair, a chance to show off your wealth and impress your guests. We're talking multiple courses, exotic dishes, maybe even a peacock or two just casually strolling around. Please don't trip over the peacock. If you were of more modest means, your cena was a simpler affair, but no less important. It was a chance to connect with your loved ones and share a meal, no matter how humble. Even if your main course was pulse, a kind of porridge made from grain, hold the applause, it's not exactly gourmet. The company was what really mattered. Now, about that food, don't get your hopes up too high. While Roman cuisine could be surprisingly sophisticated, depending on your social standing, it could also be, well, let's just say an acquired taste. Forget what you think you know about Italian food. You won't be twirling any spaghetti here. Pasta wasn't really a thing yet. The Roman diet was heavily reliant on grains, vegetables, and fruits. Meat was a luxury, especially beef, which was expensive. Pork and poultry were more common, and fish was a staple, especially for those living near the coast. The Romans were also big fans of garum, a fermented fish sauce that they put on everything. Imagine soy sauce, but fishier. A lot fishier. Historians still argue whether garum was the culinary equivalent of ketchup or more akin to anchovy paste, but either way, it was ubiquitous. You'd find it in almost every dish, from appetizers to desserts. Yes, even desserts. Don't ask. And speaking of dessert, let's talk about how the Romans ate. Forget forks and knives, my friend. The Romans ate with their hands, or with spoons for soupy dishes. It could get messy, especially if you were enjoying something like maridum, a cheese spread flavored with herbs and garlic. Imagine a medieval hummus-like concoction. Napkins were a must, unless you wanted to leave a trail of cheesy fingerprints wherever you went. You wouldn't want to be that person. If you were a guest at a wealthy Roman's dinner party, you'd likely be reclining on a couch, propped up on cushions, eating while lying down. Living the dream. Well, the dream of the upper class, anyway. The lower classes were more likely to eat sitting up, perhaps around a table or even just on the floor. It wasn't about comfort, it was about sustenance. After all, you were rebuilding your strength for another day. But those wealthy Romans? They had it made. Picture this. You're lounging on a comfortable couch. A slave is fanning you with a peacock feather, and you're being offered a selection of delicacies from a passing server. Grapes, olives, figs, maybe even a dormouse stuffed with nuts and herbs. Don't knock it till you've tried it. Or, feel free to knock it. I'm not judging. Well, maybe a little. Wine was also a staple of the Roman cena, often diluted with water. They weren't big on drinking straight wine. They thought it was barbaric. Can you imagine? The horror. They had different kinds of wine, from cheap stuff for the masses to fancy vintages for the elites. And of course, there was always the option of mulsum, wine sweetened with honey. That might sound like a decent compromise, I suppose. Historians still argue whether the Romans understood aging wine as we do today, but there's definitely evidence they appreciated a good vintage when they could get it. After dinner, the evening might continue with entertainment. Think music, poetry, storytelling, maybe even a philosophical debate or two. The Romans loved a good debate, especially if it involved politics or, even better, gossip. It was a chance to show off your wit and intelligence or, at the very least, to nod along and pretend you understood what everyone was talking about. Depending on the host's mood, there might even be games. Dice games were popular, as were board games like Ludus Latrunculorum, which was a bit like chess. Loser does the dishes? Just kidding. Slaves did the dishes. Ancient perks. However, fringe theories suggest that some Roman dinner parties weren't quite as refined as the history books make them out to be. Some historians believe that the cena could sometimes devolve into drunken orgies, wild dancing, public displays of affection, and maybe even a vomitorium on standby for those who overindulged. Now, I'm not saying that every Roman dinner party was a bacchanal, but let's just say that some of them were definitely memorable. Let's just leave it at that before we get an explicit rating. But on a more serious note, while the upper classes enjoyed their lavish dinners and entertainment, the lower classes had a very different experience. For many Romans, the evening meal was a simple affair, eaten quickly and without much fanfare. They might gather around a small table with their family, sharing a bowl of pulse or some other simple dish. There was little time for leisure or entertainment. They were tired, hungry, and worried about the next day. As the evening wore on, the streets of Rome grew darker and quieter. The oil lamps flickered, casting long shadows. The sound of laughter and music gradually faded away. People began to retire to their homes, seeking rest and shelter from the night. You might find yourself wandering through the darkened streets with only the light of the moon to guide you. The city feels different at night, more mysterious, more dangerous. It is much easier to get lost in the maze of alleyways that crisscross the sprawling urban space of ancient Rome. Before you head to bed, maybe you'd stop by a thermopolium for a nightcap. These were the ancient Roman equivalent of fast food restaurants, serving up hot food and drinks to those on the go. You could grab a cup of warm wine, spiced with honey and herbs, or maybe a small plate of olives and cheese. Just be careful not to drink too much. You don't want to wake up with a headache the size of Hadrian's Wall, the wall that took almost 10 years to build. And finally, as the city sleeps, the cycle begins again. The merchants will rise early to set up their stalls. The senators will prepare for another day of political intrigue, and the gladiators will sharpen their swords. And you, well, you'll be ready to experience another day in the life of a Roman. But for now, it's time to rest. The darkness is wrapping Rome in a blanket of sleep, and it's time to settle down for the night, ready to face whatever tomorrow brings. All right, settle in, friend. Let's dim those lights just a touch, shall we? Tonight, we're not exactly going to be frolicking through fields of wildflowers. Instead, we're taking a little stroll, or perhaps a very cautious tiptoe, through the dangers that lurked after dark in ancient Rome. Imagine yourself now. The sun has dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple that, admittedly, would look great on your Instagram. But don't get too caught up in the aesthetic, because once that last sliver of sunlight disappears, Rome transforms. And not in a Cinderella turning into a princess kind of way. More like a cute kitten turning into a snarling, alley cat kind of way. You trudge through the narrow, unpaved streets. During the day, these bustling arteries were filled with merchants hawking their wares, senators pontificating on the latest political drama, and children chasing stray dogs. Now they're mostly filled with shadows and the lingering aroma of, let's just call it, ancient sanitation. You try not to breathe too deeply. The only light comes from the occasional oil lamp flickering weakly outside the wealthier domus, casting dancing, unreliable shadows that play tricks on your eyes. You can hear the murmur of voices, hushed and conspiratorial, emanating from the dark doorways. Are they plotting revolution? Or just arguing about the price of garlic? Hard to say. Maybe both. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of political conspiracy in Rome was genuine paranoia or a well-founded fear, given the, shall we say, competitive nature of Roman politics. You clutch your purse a little tighter. Robbery was, shall we say, a popular pastime for those less inclined to honest labor. You're hoping your slightly threadbare toga doesn't scream, easy target. Although, statistically, it probably does. Fun fact: Roman crime statistics, while not exactly as meticulously kept as, say, modern New York cities, indicate that petty theft and street muggings were shockingly common. And let's just say the Roman equivalent of the police, the vigiles, weren't exactly known for their lightning-fast response times. Think of them as the ancient Roman version of dial-up internet, technically there, but not particularly helpful when you need them most. You hear a sudden scuffling sound behind you, and your heart leaps into your throat. You spin around, ready to defend yourself with whatever's at hand. A loose cobblestone? Your withering wit? Thankfully, it's just a couple of stray dogs, snarling over a particularly appealing piece of garbage. You let out a shaky breath and keep moving. The dogs, incidentally, were also a major hazard, as feral packs roamed the streets, often rabid and hungry. It wasn't uncommon to hear tales of unfortunate souls being set upon by these canine gangs. Consider them the ancient Roman equivalent of a very aggressive homeowners association. Now, let's talk about fire. Ah, yes, fire. The silent, creeping terror that could reduce your entire neighborhood to a pile of ash in a matter of hours. Most Roman buildings, particularly the insulae, or apartment buildings, were constructed largely of wood. And while wood is lovely and rustic, it's not exactly known for its fire-resistant properties. You shudder, imagining the inferno. Historians still debate whether Nero actually fiddled while Rome burned, but the fact remains that fires were a constant and devastating threat. Think about it. Open flames for cooking, heating, and lighting were commonplace. Combine that with cramped living conditions, shoddy construction, and a distinct lack of fire hydrants, and you have a recipe for disaster. A single carelessly discarded ember could quickly spiral into a citywide catastrophe. And the vigiles, again, were often more adept at, observing the fire than actually extinguishing it. You suppose you can't blame them entirely. Running headfirst into a blazing inferno takes a certain dedication. As you continue your journey through the darkened streets, you notice a group of figures huddled around a brazier, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. They're clearly up to no good. Perhaps they're plotting to overthrow the emperor? Maybe they're just playing dice for ridiculously high stakes. Or maybe they're debating the merits of different brands of olive oil. Honestly, with Romans, it could be anything. Quirky factoid: some historians suggest that Roman criminals often used elaborate code words and secret languages to communicate, making it difficult for law enforcement to understand their plans. So, imagine trying to decipher a bunch of toga-clad gangsters speaking in some ancient form of Pig Latin. Good luck with that. You quicken your pace, wanting to avoid any unwanted attention. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and something else. You can't quite place it. It's vaguely floral, but also unsettlingly sweet. Then you realize what it is: incense. You're approaching the temple district. While the temples themselves were impressive structures, particularly during the day, at night they took on a decidedly more eerie atmosphere. The flickering candlelight cast long, distorted shadows of the statues of the gods, making them seem almost alive. And the air was heavy with the scent of incense, which, while pleasant in small doses, could become rather overwhelming after a while. It's like walking into a Yankee Candle store, but with added existential dread. Now, here's a little fringe fact for you. There were persistent rumors that certain temples served as meeting places for various cults and secret societies. Some of these groups were harmless enough, engaging in philosophical discussions and ritualistic feasts. Others, however, were rumored to engage in, let's just say, less savory activities. Animal sacrifices, clandestine orgies, political conspiracies. The rumor mill was always churning. You wouldn't want to stumble in on that party uninvited. You're almost home, and the thought brings a small measure of relief. But as you round a corner, you notice something that makes your blood run cold. A figure lies slumped against a wall, bathed in the faint glow of a nearby lamp. It's a man, dressed in the tattered robes of a beggar. You approach cautiously, your heart pounding in your chest. He's not moving. You kneel down and gently shake his shoulder. He doesn't respond. He's gone. You quickly check for any signs of foul play. A dagger wound? A strangled throat? But there's nothing. He's simply died. Perhaps of hunger? Or disease? Or simply exhaustion? Death was a constant companion in ancient Rome, especially for the poor and marginalized. Life expectancy was significantly lower than it is today, and disease, famine, and violence were rampant. You take a moment to offer a silent prayer for his soul. Perhaps someone will find him in the morning and give him a proper burial. Or perhaps he will simply be left to rot in the streets, another nameless victim of the harsh realities of Roman life. You stand up, feeling a chill run down your spine that has nothing to do with the night air. You're shaken, but you know you can't linger. You have to keep moving. You have to get home. As you finally reach your insula, you breathe a sigh of relief. It's not much. A small, cramped room on the upper floors, but it's safe, relatively speaking. You double bolt the door, just in case. Before you settle down for the night, you take one last look out the window. The city is shrouded in darkness, punctuated only by the occasional flickering lamp. You can hear the distant sounds of the city, the barking of dogs, the drunken shouts of revelers, the mournful cries of the night watch. It's a symphony of chaos and danger. You close the shutters, blocking out the unsettling sights and sounds of the night. You light a small oil lamp and settle into your straw-filled mattress. It's not exactly a Tempur-Pedic, but it's better than sleeping on the streets. Before drifting off to sleep, you can't help but ponder the fragility of life, the ever-present threat of danger, and the stark inequalities that defined ancient Roman society. And you also think about how much you appreciate indoor plumbing. Seriously, you close your eyes, trying to push the anxieties of the day and the night from your mind. You try to imagine yourself back in that field of wildflowers, bathed in the warm sunlight, surrounded by peace and tranquility. But the image is fleeting. The shadows of Rome still linger in your mind, a constant reminder of the perils that lurk just beyond the door. You pull the rough wool blanket tighter around you and try to drift off to sleep. Hopefully you'll have better dreams tonight. And hopefully tomorrow will be a little brighter. Because, let's be honest, after a night like this, you deserve it. Now, as you try to drift off, just remember, even the mighty Roman Empire had its share of, well, let's call them urban planning challenges. Sweet dreams, or at least, dreams that don't involve rabid dogs and burning buildings. Alright, settle in, settle in. You've had a long day navigating the forum, dodging chariots, and bartering for that suspiciously cheap toga. Now, it's time to unwind Roman style. But before you start picturing a fluffy duvet and a memory foam mattress, well, let's just say sleep in ancient Rome was a tad different than what you're probably used to. You trudge back to your domus, hopefully not stepping in anything unsavory. Ah, home sweet home. Or, home, depending on your budget. First things first, privacy? What's that? Remember, in many Roman homes, especially in the insulae, those multi-story apartment blocks, personal space was a luxury, not a right. You're likely sharing a room, maybe even a bed, with other members of your family. And by family, I mean everyone from your parents and siblings to your great-aunt twice removed and her collection of stray cats. Okay, maybe not the cats, but you get the idea. Speaking of beds, prepare yourself. Forget the plushness. Think more along the lines of a wooden frame with some woven straps or ropes for support. A thin mattress stuffed with straw or wool might grace the top, if you're lucky. Historians still argue whether these beds were truly as uncomfortable as they sound, or if we're just spoiled by modern innovations. Maybe our ancestors had tougher backs? Or lower expectations? Either way, you're not exactly sinking into a cloud. And don't even think about adjustable bases or heated blankets. You're more likely to find a family of mice nesting in the straw than a remote control. You attempt to get comfortable. The straw rustles beneath you with every movement. You try to ignore the sounds of the city drifting in through the window. The barking dogs, the hawkers shouting their wares, the occasional drunken brawl erupting in the street. It's like trying to sleep next to a construction site. That's also a petting zoo. Now, about those sleeping arrangements. If you're wealthy, congratulations. You might have your own cubiculum or bedroom. But even then, it's not exactly a sanctuary of solitude. Servants are constantly bustling about, tending to the lamps, cleaning, or just generally making their presence known. Think of it as a permanent open-door policy, whether you like it or not. Wealthier Romans might even have slept with a slave stationed nearby, ready to respond to their every whim. Talk about a sleep disruptor. But back to reality. You're probably in a shared room. Your little brother is snoring like a wild boar. Your aunt is muttering in her sleep. And your dad is, well, let's just say he's not a quiet sleeper either. You try to find a position that minimizes the discomfort of the straw mattress and the cacophony of sounds. Maybe if you pull the blanket over your head, but then you'll suffocate. Decisions. You finally manage to drift off, only to be awakened by a scratching sound. Rats. Of course, rats. They were a common problem in Roman cities, especially in the Insulae. You try to shoo them away, but they're persistent little critters. You wonder if they're plotting to steal your toes. Eventually, they scurry off, leaving you wide awake and wondering if you should invest in a cat. Now, here's a quirky little fact for you. Some Romans believed that sleeping naked could attract bad luck or even evil spirits. So, even on the hottest nights, you'd probably be wearing some sort of tunic or undergarment. Imagine sweating through a summer night in Rome, covered in itchy wool. Fun times! And speaking of clothing, sleepwear wasn't exactly a thing. You'd likely sleep in whatever you wore during the day, or perhaps an older, worn-out version of it. Pajamas? Silk robes? Nope. Think more along the lines of a repurposed toga. Talk about a fashion faux pas, or maybe a toga faux pas. The concept of a good night's sleep was certainly different. Romans often took naps during the day, which might explain why they weren't too concerned about creating the perfect sleeping environment. And they definitely weren't checking their sleep cycle app every morning. They probably woke up, stretched, and got on with their day, no matter how restless the night had been. Historians still debate whether the lack of sleep had any significant impact on Roman society. Did sleep deprivation contribute to irritability, poor decision-making, or even the fall of the empire? Probably not the fall of the empire, but you never know. Maybe if Caligula had gotten a solid 8 hours, things would have turned out differently. Despite the discomfort, the noise, and the rats, you eventually fall into a deeper sleep. You dream of gladiators, chariot races, and mountains of delicious grapes. You dream of a quieter, more comfortable existence. You dream of sleep. You wake up feeling surprisingly refreshed, all things considered. The sun is streaming through the window, and the city is already bustling with activity. You stretch, yawn, and prepare to face another day in ancient Rome. And you can't help but wonder, did anyone actually get a good night's sleep back then? One thing's for sure, sleep in ancient Rome wasn't exactly a luxury spa experience. But it was a part of life, just like everything else. And despite the challenges, people managed to survive, thrive, and build one of the greatest empires in history. Maybe there's something to be said for embracing the chaos and finding rest wherever you can. Alright, that's enough Roman history for one night. Now, let's wind things down a bit. Imagine the gentle warmth of the Roman sun fading behind the hills. The sounds of the city soften, becoming a distant hum. The scent of olive oil and herbs lingers in the air. You settle back onto your, well, let's just call it your sleeping surface. The straw rustles softly beneath you. Close your eyes. Feel the weight of the day lifting from your shoulders. Let the worries of the forum fade away. Breathe in, breathe out. The images of ancient Rome begin to blur. The gladiators, the chariots, the rats, they all dissolve into a peaceful nothingness. You are safe. You are warm. You are at rest. Imagine the soft glow of a lamp flickering in the distance. It casts a warm, inviting light on the walls of your domus. You are surrounded by the familiar sounds of your family, their gentle breathing a comforting rhythm. Let your mind drift. Let your thoughts wander. There is nothing you need to do. Nothing you need to worry about. Just let go. The sounds of the modern world begin to seep back in. The gentle hum of your refrigerator. The distant rumble of traffic. But they are faint, distant. They cannot reach you here, in this peaceful space. You are safe. You are calm. You are drifting. Sweet dreams.